Welcome to the Real News Network and our series of interviews with Tom Ferguson. Thanks, Tom. So we're talking about the stimulus package in segment one. We talked about the stimulus package not being big enough, and later we'll talk about, so then what are the consequences of it not being big enough? Then we started talking about the banking quote-unquote reform. How would you have done the banking reform? What should have been the plan?
I would have done it the way Roosevelt did it in the New Deal, or with some variations, what the Swedes did in the early 1990s, what the Norwegians did, for that matter, even what the Germans did in the 30s, an example that tends to drop off the charts. I mean, it's not as though there's a huge bone of contention in this in economic history. You gotta make the banks write down the bad assets. You have to get the bad assets out of the bank, because if you don't, they just sit there and are zombie banks, always worried about tipping into insolvency in the next cash flow crisis. So you got to get the bad assets out of there, and the simple way to do that is to just, if the bank is insolvent, because if it's insolvent, you're not taking anybody's property. There's no equity there to take. It's zero, effectively. You just take them over.
Now, you've talked about starting the process with actually finding out what the truth of these banks is. So what is that?
This means you unleash bank examiners to actually go find out what's up. I mean, one of the striking things about the Geithner program yesterday was he's busily announcing this program before he does the stress tests on the banks. Remember, they were supposed to find out the condition of the banks and all that? Well, you got to say, wait a minute. Don't we have the cart before the horse here? Do we have the slightest idea who's solvent and who's not? My suspicion is all along they have never been too clear about that. And then this is a case of, the technical term for this is regulatory forbearance. That is to say, they know they're broke and everybody's afraid to ask. It's sort of don't ask, don't tell for banking. You've clearly got a lot of zombie banks. The thing is, you should get rid of the zombies. You take just take the bad assets out of them, throw them into some owned by the people of the United States for the time being, then try to sell them back. That's one way you get some money back.
And let the zombie banks go down.
Well, you take them over. You can either you can close some. You don't need to save them all, but you're going to have some banks in order to do economic growth.
So in other words, the ones that seem to have something left.
Well, the obvious move is, if they're hopelessly insolvent, close them. And if they're close to being solvent, this was the formula in the Reconstruction Finance Corporation in the New Deal. If they were close, I think it was, if you could reach 90%, you were safe. If you were between 75 and 90, they gave you a chance to raise some private capital. And if you were below 75, you were closed.
And the ones you save, you nationalize.
Yeah, at that point, you take ownership in exchange for putting in the money. You take them over, recapitalize them. Now you own you own the bank, the bad assets, and you've put the new money into it. So you can now resell the bank onto the private marketplace for actually a fair amount of cash. I mean, these are now going concerns again, and they're worth a lot. So you can recoup. The Norwegians claim they made all their money back. The Swedes sometimes do. I'm a little skeptical, but they made a lot of money out of their privatizing the bank that they took over. That's clear. They got, I think, one or two that they still haven't done. So you can do that. Thing is, you get rid of this quick, and somebody is back in there lending immediately. I mean, like within a month or 2 or 3, not within 3, 4, or 5 years. You're not doing the Japan-style story, which is what the U.S. has embarked on, a public-private partnership that is effectively, it's very Japanese, and it's going to give you the Japanese outcome, which is slow growth for a long time. I mean, these guys are not going to be in the business of making new loans.
What you're suggesting
there's a wonderful moment in Davos a few weeks ago when the head of Citigroup, he actually got up and said something like, well, gee, if you really want a bank loan, why don't you just buy it on the secondary market? That's not what the U.S. needs right now.
A lot of people were suggesting what you're saying before Geithner's plan came out. He didn't go this way.
It's fair to say they are obsessed with the private financial sector. Now, there are various views about this. I've got a very definite one. I actually do campaign finance. I mean, what I actually do is political money. And so, I mean, I'm in the process of finishing my, every 4 years, my slogan is, I'll tell you who bought your candidate before you vote for him or her. And it takes a lot. I mean, I did a study of the early money, and it was perfectly obvious that Obama was the candidate of finance and to an almost exclusive degree, in the sense that that was the sector that had he was far more concentrated there than, say, Hillary Clinton was, though she had plenty of support in finance too.
Finance meaning Wall Street, meaning
Wall Street, in a sentence. Banks, investment houses, private equity. You could insurance would count in that too. And I take it there will be no argument on this after AIG. And I'm just finishing for the whole 2008, and it's just obvious. You get what you pay for, and they paid. And so I'm sorry to say, the people who caused the problem are, to a very large degree, the folks who sort of primary backers of Obama. So I'm not surprised that, to use Paul Krugman's term, they're almost obsessed with the sort of private sector solution in finance. It's not an obsession.
Now, just for the record, when did you see this coming, and when did you start speaking publicly about it?
This is, ever since I had a conversation with Congressman Barney Frank back early in 2008, it was clear to me. And I tried to warn him at that point about the what would happen if the bond insurers were allowed to go broke. And what would happen is that huge numbers of nonprofits would be unable to sell floating rate notes. And that was, now my university doesn't really do that. A lot of universities do. That strikes me as a tragedy just by itself there. But it's also true that hospitals, a lot of higher education funding authorities and things like that, they all use floating rate notes to get funded. Ever as that market dried up, it did. But Congressman Frank actually said to me, and I will remember this as long as I live, what difference would it make? And, I came home to my wife and I said, look, this guy doesn't get it. And he's talking to Treasury. They clearly don't get it. Time to get out of the market.
Well, in the next segment of our interview, let's talk about this. If the stimulus isn't big enough, and if the quote-unquote bank reform isn't going to work, what is this economy going to look like in the next year or two? So please join us for the next segment of our interview with Tom Ferguson.
Donate today and receive a new documentary film available to members of the Real News Network. The History of the National Security State with legendary author Gore Vidal. Bonus features of the DVD include an in-depth response to Vidal from ex-CIA analyst Ray McGovern, who served under 7 U.S. presidents, an exclusive interview with Colin Powell's former Chief of Staff Larry Wilkerson, and an insightful interview with oil policy analyst Antonia Juhas.
The news magazine of the screen. Living glimpses of history in the making.
Hollywood and Washington, there's a symbiotic relationship. They both deal with illusions. Reality doesn't often play much of a part. I think I saw through the myth of the Cold War almost from the beginning. I was a Washington political kid from a political family. Roosevelt first had radio because he had this great speaking voice and everyone liked to hear. Truman proceeded to break every arrangement that Roosevelt had set up for a peaceful coexistence. And Truman thought that it would be a good idea. Why not just stay armed all the time? And then he devised the national security state. You've got to go up and swear allegiance to the United States or else you're a commie. I mean, we had imported fascism. We get Dwight Eisenhower, who said that we have this great military industrial complex. It is a dangerous thing. And he said this is going to change everything. And the way our country's governed is going to change us politically. Along comes Jack Kennedy, who wanted to make his mark, believed in the Cold War. But he said, in this kind of politics, it is the appearance of things that matters. I think everybody should take a sober look at the world about us. The national security state still exists, only it isn't communism anymore, it's terrorism. This is the most serious thing that has happened in the history of the United States. Knowledge is power. We need an honest news system.
We need the real news.
This is the sort of thing we can build right now without anyone else's permission from the government or from the business community. It's the power's in our hands.
If we're not going to sleepwalk into more wars, we think we need to start with a television news network that won't bow to pressure and has the courage to seek facts. And that means independent economics. And that's why we need you.
Make a tax-deductible donation now of at least $10 a month or a one-time give of at least $75. As a thank you for your support, we will send you the new documentary film, The History of the National Security State.